Let us worship and let us learn to love. Those words, of course, from Ken Patton. Let us worship and let us learn to love. Worship and love are two terms that are inextricably linked. And they are also both words that have, in some respects, fallen on hard times. I think it's safe to say that in certain quarters of our society, what we are doing right now, this Sunday morning, could be considered a bit unfashionable, unproductive, maybe a little flaky, or overwrought. Those days when it was socially conventional, even perhaps socially necessary to enter a sanctuary like ours on a regular basis, those days are now nowhere to be found. Which honestly I think is a good thing. But as we sit together today, with Easter behind us and Christmas far, far ahead of us, each of those days, of course, bringing throngs of visitors to our sanctuary. As we sit here today, the church has been returned to its people. Those of us who remain in church on a day like this remain for many separate, individual, unique reasons. And whatever those reasons may be, we arrive here today from our own sense of spiritual need and obligation, rather than from any cultural expectation. Why, after all? Why, the secular world asks, would a rational human being, and I think we all like to think of ourselves as being reasonably rational, why would a rational human being want to sit in a room for an hour to sing hymns and hear some poetry and then listen to someone talk about it? We do not receive any obvious gift of productivity from this exercise. And there are, as we all know, many more convenient ways to hang out with our friends. Most of us have asked these questions too. How can we not? Our Sunday gathering is a non-monetized hour in very busy weeks, while also being not really a vacation. And not strictly entertainment either. Although I do hope we're entertaining sometimes. This worship thing is a strange entity in a culture, in the midst of a culture that has a different set of values. Values that usually point to the question, what is in it for me? That columnist, David Leonard, in our reading today about the Schultz Hour, opines that even before smartphones, this country's professional culture had come to venerate freneticism. He asks us, how often do you hear somebody humble brag about how busy they are? The saddest version, he says, is the story of people who sent work emails on their wedding day, or from the hospital room where their child is born, and they are proud of it. Leonard draws inspiration from former Secretary of State George Shultz, who would sequester himself for an hour a week in his office to consider the larger questions of his occupation, and it's a good thing that he did. And whatever challenges we face, in fact, it's a good thing. It's important to approach those challenges with the big picture in mind. So in a way, what we are doing is similar to the Schultz Hour. Worship is, in one sense, a retreat from our daily activity for the purpose of being more intentional about those very activities. But Leonard is addressing something slightly different from what we do today. In worship, we go a step, or maybe two steps further. The Schultz Hour, as he conceives it, is solely about how our actions impact our work, and perhaps in another context, our lives in general. But it is purely practical. It's results-based in a concrete and measurable way. And that's not what's happening when we come to church. At least not in its entirety. Because worship is also explicitly about connection and about relationship. Worship is about love. It assumes a philosophical, spiritual worldview, which for us includes an attempt to see the sacred, the transcendent in our lives, in each other, and in the world at large. Jacob Trapp tells us that to worship is to stand in awe under a heaven of stars before a flower, a leaf in sunlight, or a grain of sand. It is an inarticulate silence, yearning to speak. It is the window of the moment, open to the sky of the eternal. The window of the moment, open to the sky of the eternal. So worship, as described by Trapp, has many elements that we may think of as being quite traditional, in spite of his own rather untraditional theology. Some of what he describes, in fact, sounds distinctly religious, even in a stereotypical sort of way. He talks about the mystery within us reaching to the mystery beyond, that evokes the silence of this church sanctuary on Christmas Eve, and in a different way, even the chaos of the same space on Easter morning. He hits the same notes on a more individual, personalized level when he says that worship is to listen through a storm to the still, small voice within. That storm, that personal storm that we are all familiar with, might even be the time for praying those much older words from the 121st Psalm. God will not let your foot be moved. God who keeps you will not slumber. But that otherworldly element isn't all that worship is about. And to focus solely on that part of the process leaves us with only half a story, half a faithful life. Because what we do here in worship, what we do involves a charge. A charge. One that is sometimes explicit but is always present. Worship isn't a retreat. It isn't passive contemplation. Instead, it is contemplation within and of intentional action. Worship is contemplation within and of intentional action. Seeking, exploring, seeing, hearing, touching, tasting, and yes, even smelling. Discovering the divine in what we experience every day. Again, in Trapp's words, worship is a loneliness seeking communion. It is a fire within our hearts that moves through deeds of kindness and thoughts and acts of love. Trapp tells us that to worship is to work. To worship is to work with dedication and with skill. Now, while it is safe to say that worship in our tradition does in fact mean both to work and to pause from that work, not all our works are worshipful, are they? Nor are all of our pauses. But sometimes, and this is the great miracle, sometimes they actually are, with practice. After all, we human beings strive to increase that part of us that engages the sacred. How do we do that? How do we find that worshipful spirit in our lives? One thing that we can do is own the hour. own the hour that we dedicate to the exercise of our faith. By developing our spiritual muscles, if you will, through discipline. And I realize that saying that we exercise our spiritual muscles sounds a lot like Pilates. But of course, we know that it doesn't have to be that strenuous. Sometimes in worship, we just need to show up. The spiritual world is present to us, after all, even in the darkest of times. And in our tradition, there is little gap between the world we live in and the world of the Spirit. So opportunities for worship abound wherever we may find ourselves. Those of you who are still reading Emerson or who hang out here enough to listen to enough of my sermons know that transcendentalists and other mystics frequently believe that the material world that we perceive points directly to the spiritual one. And that by engaging in the first world with intention and with love, in the broadest sense, we catch glimpses of the other. This is why in confirmation class, which we met this morning, it's why in confirmation class we are looking at what we do in the world, our passions, our interests, our hobbies, to help us discern our spiritual relationships. And it's why when we come here on a normal, average Sunday morning, the theme, the readings, the music, and the sermon are likely to be about what is going on beyond our doors, in the place where we live and grow and make decisions that affect the entire web of life. We worship together in this place to experience the Spirit in the quiet of our own hearts. And we worship in this place together for no less a task than to share the inner motions of our souls, to feel the call to the divine in the thoughts and actions of fellow inhabitants of creation. That is what we are doing when we worship today. So today, I will close again with that charge from the great Universalist, Ken Patton. Let us worship, he says, with the opening of all the windows of our being, with a full outstretching of our spirits. Life comes with singing and with laughter, with tears and confiding, with rising waves too great to be held in the mind and heart and body, to those who have fallen in love with life. Let us worship, he says, and let us learn to love. Amen.